He was an unpleasant character. He used to host dinners at which his great party trick was to pass round anatomical specimens in glass jars of female body parts, including uteruses. And Tumblty's name has been connected with the whole Ripper murders.
For over a century, the name Jack the Ripper has haunted London's fog-drenched streets, a phantom who struck terror into Whitechapel and vanished without a trace. Now, new DNA research claims to have unmasked him, but as experts probe deeper, the truth grows darker. In this video, we will find out if the real Ripper is still hiding in plain sight. The shadows of Whitechapel. In the late 19th century, London's East End was a maze of poverty, vice, and desperation. Whitechapel's narrow streets overflowed with immigrants, beggars, and laborers struggling to survive. Amid this chaos, a silent terror emerged. A murderer who stalked the fog-shrouded nights and struck with horrifying precision. The year was 1888, and 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, would meet their fate at the hands of a killer who seemed almost invisible.
The shadowy and fog-filled streets of the East End of London. More specifically, the Whitechapel district, an area with a proclivity for violence and crime amongst the backdrop of poverty.
Newspapers seized the story, turning the Ripper into a national obsession. Each killing was more gruesome than the last, fueling panic and morbid fascination. The press gave the murderer his infamous name, Jack the Ripper, after a taunting letter supposedly written by the killer himself. Scotland Yard threw its best detectives into the hunt, but every lead dissolved into rumor and confusion. The darkness of Whitechapel became a living character in the story, a smog-choked labyrinth hiding both predator and prey. Witnesses described fleeting glimpses: a man in a dark coat, a glint of metal, a shadow slipping around a corner. But the Ripper was always one step ahead, as if he knew the streets better than anyone. The killings stopped as suddenly as they began, leaving a trail of mutilated bodies and unanswered questions. As decades passed, the case grew into a cultural obsession. Books, films, and countless theories emerged, each claiming to reveal the truth. But despite the flood of speculation, no one could say for certain who Jack the Ripper really was. The legend became larger than life, a symbol of mystery itself. Yet in recent years, science promised what investigators of the past could not: hard evidence. When researchers claimed they had uncovered DNA from one of the Ripper's victims, the world held its breath. For the first time, there might be proof, not just theory. But what they found would spark a storm that changed everything: a century of endless suspects. As the trail of blood faded into history, the hunt for Jack the Ripper became an obsession spanning generations. Without modern forensic tools, early investigators were left to chase theories built on witness accounts and speculation. Soon, the list of suspects grew into a gallery of notorious figures, each more intriguing than the last.
We're in Ripper Town now. Rip City. This is what the people wanted. We're gonna bag us a Ripper today.
They're gonna slap the cuffs on him.
It's been over 100 years.
Some pointed to Montague John Druitt, a troubled barrister who drowned himself in the Thames shortly after the murders. Others were certain it was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant with documented mental illness, who fit the police's description and was later confined to an asylum. Even prominent names like Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, were dragged into the conspiracy. The idea that royalty might be involved electrified the public imagination and fed the press frenzy. Authors, historians, and amateurs each tried to claim the truth. In the mid-20th century, new theories exploded. Painters, doctors, and even women were accused. The Ripper case had become a mirror for every generation's fears: class inequality, xenophobia, corruption, and the dark corners of the human mind. Each solution was hailed as definitive, only to collapse under scrutiny. Still, there were details that refused to fade: the surgical precision of the killings, the timing of the attacks, and the letter signed "From Hell." These details hinted that the Ripper wasn't just a common murderer. He understood anatomy, moved strategically, and vanished without trace. He was, to many, the embodiment of calculated madness. By the 21st century, modern science promised a revolution. With preserved evidence from the victims, especially the shawl of Catherine Eddowes, researchers believed that forensic technology could finally unmask the killer. The theory was simple: extract DNA, compare it to living descendants, and the truth would finally be undeniable. But when the results were released, they didn't close the case, they deepened it. The world's most infamous mystery was about to reopen in ways no one expected. The DNA revelation that shocked historians. In 2014, the world held its breath when forensic scientists claimed they had finally cracked the code behind the century-old Ripper mystery. The evidence came from an unlikely artifact, a blood-stained shawl allegedly found near Catherine Eddowes, one of Jack the Ripper's final victims. The shawl, long dismissed as legend, was now under the scrutiny of advanced DNA testing.
And there are those who believe that this dishonest, self-proclaimed doctor was, in fact, Jack the Ripper.
Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a Finnish biochemist and forensic expert, led the investigation. Using mitochondrial DNA analysis, he compared genetic material extracted from the shawl to that of living descendants of both Eddowes and a long-debated suspect, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber who had been institutionalized shortly after the murders. The results were explosive. The DNA, Louhelainen claimed, was a match. After 126 years, it seemed the shadowy figure who had haunted London streets finally had a face. Headlines around the world declared the mystery solved. Jack the Ripper identified, screamed front pages from London to New York. Kosminski, long whispered about in Scotland Yard's inner circles, was suddenly the most infamous man in history. His name became synonymous with the evil that had eluded justice for generations. Yet, as swiftly as the triumph came, so did the doubts. Critics pointed out the lack of peer-reviewed publication, the questionable chain of custody of the shawl, and the potential for contamination after more than a century. Historians argued that mitochondrial DNA could only link a person to a maternal line, not definitively to one man. The revelation, instead of ending the debate, only split it wider open. But one thing was undeniable. Science had breathed new life into an old ghost. The world realized that Jack the Ripper's identity was not just a historical curiosity, it was a window into how science, history, and myth intertwine. The more answers we found, the darker the questions became. Something else, buried deep within the data, still didn't add up. And when researchers dug deeper into the samples, they found something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the Ripper's true story. The evidence. No one expected. Just when the world thought it had cornered Jack the Ripper, the investigation took a strange and unsettling turn. Forensic specialists re-examining the shawl samples noticed anomalies in the data, tiny traces of genetic markers that didn't fully align with Aaron Kosminski's lineage. What had initially appeared to be a perfect match suddenly revealed irregularities. Something was off. Dr. Louhelainen's original analysis, though groundbreaking, wasn't airtight. In a subsequent review, another research team noticed a discrepancy in the sequencing results, suggesting that a second, unidentified genetic profile was also present on the shawl. This wasn't just contamination from modern handlers. The markers were old, consistent with DNA degradation over time. In other words, another person's genetic imprint had been preserved in the same fibers as the victim's blood. Historians scrambled to interpret what this meant. Could there have been two killers? Or was someone else present at the scene? An accomplice, a bystander, or perhaps even an investigator who tampered with the evidence long before it was cataloged. The more they searched, the stranger the story became. Then came the real bombshell. The shawl itself might not have even belonged to Catherine Eddowes. Museum records showed inconsistencies in its chain of custody, and eyewitness accounts from the original crime scene never mentioned it. Was the DNA found on the shawl truly from the victim, or from another source entirely? Suddenly, the celebrated solution to the Ripper case was collapsing. Historians who had once hailed Kosminski's identification began to retract their confidence. The case had transformed from a triumph of science to a cautionary tale about the limits of evidence, the fragility of time, and the danger of declaring victory too soon. But what if this was more than just a forensic mix-up? Some began to whisper that the very foundation of the Ripper investigation, the police files, the evidence, even the suspects, might have been manipulated from the start. If that were true, then perhaps Jack the Ripper's secret wasn't just who he was, but why his identity was buried in the first place. The hidden files of Scotland Yard. Behind the polished walls of Scotland Yard lies an archive of secrets, dusty files, yellowed photos, and testimonies that never saw the light of day. For decades, the official Jack the Ripper investigation was presented as a mystery of incompetence and confusion. But as modern researchers began digging deeper, they found that much of the truth had been deliberately concealed.
The crime is one of the most brutal that have occurred for some years. For a poor, defenseless woman to be outraged and stabbed in such a manner is almost beyond belief.
In the 1890s, when the murders first gripped London, Scotland Yard was under enormous pressure. The city demanded answers, Parliament wanted justice, and the newspapers were feeding a frenzy. Yet despite hundreds of interviews and dozens of suspects, the case quietly went cold. What many didn't know was that several top-ranking officers, Chief Inspector Donald Swanson and Sir Melville Macnaghten among them, believed they already knew the killer's identity. Swanson's secret marginal notes, discovered years later in a personal copy of a Ripper book, revealed something astonishing. He wrote that the man responsible was indeed Aaron Kosminski, but he also mentioned that no sufficient evidence could be brought forward. Macnaghten, in his own confidential memorandum, named 3 suspects, all conveniently dead or institutionalized, effectively closing the case without an official resolution. But there were also rumors that certain names had been intentionally removed from the files. Some historians point to a small circle of the London elite, doctors, aristocrats, and police sympathizers, whose involvement, if exposed, could have brought down reputations and shaken public trust. Files marked classified disappeared mysteriously in the early 20th century, and a significant portion of the Ripper evidence logbook was lost in an unexplained fire. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer it became. The Ripper story might not have been a failure of investigation, but a success of suppression. Scotland Yard's silence wasn't about incompetence, it was about control. And yet, decades later, fragments of these lost records began to surface in private collections and estates. What they revealed hinted that Jack the Ripper may have been far closer to power than anyone dared believe. The royal connection, revisited for years. The royal conspiracy surrounding Jack the Ripper was dismissed as sensational fiction, just another Victorian tabloid fantasy. But when fragments of the lost Scotland Yard documents resurfaced, historians began to wonder if there was more truth hidden beneath the scandal than anyone dared admit. The whispers pointed toward one of the most shocking possibilities in British history, that someone connected to the royal family might have played a role in the murders, or in their cover-up.
Francis Tumblety, he was an American so-called Indian herb doctor. In other words, he basically was a quack who went around selling alleged remedies, cure-alls, and preying on the gullible.
The theory first gained traction in the 1970s when Stephen Knight published Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, alleging that the murders were part of a royal cover-up. According to the story, Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, had secretly married a working-class woman named Annie Crook, who bore his child. When a group of prostitutes supposedly learned of this secret, they were targeted for elimination to protect the monarchy's reputation. Historians long dismissed Knight's theory as fanciful, yet when the newly uncovered memos from Scotland Yard were examined, they hinted that high-ranking officials had indeed intervened in the investigation, pressuring detectives to suppress certain leads and redirect attention elsewhere. There were records of meetings between royal advisors and police officials during the height of the killings, though the purpose of those discussions remained vague and undocumented. More disturbing still was evidence suggesting that one of the surgeons allegedly connected to the royal household, Sir William Gull, had been under quiet scrutiny. He possessed the anatomical knowledge the killer displayed and access to the very districts where the murders occurred. The forensic breakthrough that changed everything. For more than a century, the Jack the Ripper case stood as a symbol of unsolved evil, an enigma immune to time. But in the early 2020s, advances in forensic science reignited the investigation in a way no one expected. DNA analysis has come a long way since the controversial Schall test. Now, using next-generation sequencing, NGS, and epigenetic age mapping, scientists could do what their predecessors never could: extract a clearer genetic and behavioral profile from even the faintest biological trace.
For more than a decade, Tumblety had sold a number of medicinal remedies in both the United States and England, and had also claimed to be a doctor and treated numerous patients, in spite of the fact that he was not a licensed physician.
A multinational research team, working under the name Project Whitechapel Revisited, obtained access to preserved police evidence held in private collections. Among them, a fragment of an envelope believed to contain the infamous From Hell letter. The letter, sent to police in 1888, was written in a red substance once thought to be ink. but chemical testing revealed traces of degraded hemoglobin. It wasn't ink at all, it was blood. When researchers sequenced the microscopic samples, they discovered a partial DNA profile, male, European ancestry, but with markers consistent with early Eastern European migration. More intriguingly, forensic phenotyping suggested the man was left-handed and had a distinctive metabolic condition linked to mental instability. These findings aligned disturbingly well with witness reports from 1888, describing a man of foreign appearance, nervous, and oddly coordinated. Details that once seemed trivial now became vital clues. Yet the greatest surprise wasn't in the profile itself, but in its comparison. When matched against the previously tested DNA from the Kosminski line, the results were not identical, but related. The two profiles shared enough genetic markers to suggest a familial link. Could the real killer have been a relative of Aaron Kosminski, someone close enough to fit the description, yet distant enough to escape notice? If true, the Ripper mystery had never truly been solved. It had only been misunderstood. The real question now wasn't who Jack the Ripper was, but how close investigators had come to unmasking him before the trail was buried forever. The confession, hidden in plain sight. Among the hundreds of letters sent to the police during the height of the Whitechapel murders, most were dismissed as hoaxes, products of fear and opportunism. But in 2023, one overlooked document resurfaced from a private archive in Essex, revealing something extraordinary. It was a short, chilling note written in fading ink, signed not Jack the Ripper, but with a cryptic mark, a slanted cross, and the initials AK.
Was this a botched attempt by the killer to keep their promise? Or was it merely one of numerous lacerations with no connection to the letter? The contents of the letters notwithstanding, modern linguistic analysis does suggest that they were penned by the same hand. So, hoaxes or not, the authors were likely one and the same.
At first glance, the letter seemed unremarkable, yet handwriting experts noticed uncanny similarities between it and the authenticated From Hell letter. More intriguing still was the language used. Phrases like, "They lied about me," and "The doctor hides their sins through my knife," suggested a man tormented by guilt, but also aware of something, or someone, he was protecting. When linguistic analysts compared the syntax to known writings of Aaron Kosminski's extended family, the results were shocking. The phrasing and structure bore strong resemblance to Polish Yiddish speech patterns of the time. The letter, once dismissed as a fake, now seemed to come from someone who not only lived in London's East End, but also carried the linguistic fingerprint of the Kosminski household. But there was more. Chemical analysis of the ink showed traces of phenol, a compound often used by barbers for disinfection in the late 19th century. Combined with the DNA fragment retrieved from the envelope flap, it became evident that whoever sealed this letter had both direct knowledge of the crimes and occupational exposure consistent with barbers or butchers, the very professions long suspected. Historians began to see the Ripper case in a new light. Perhaps the killer wasn't a deranged aristocrat or a rogue surgeon, but a man driven by obsession, humiliation, and a desperate attempt to silence secrets too dangerous to expose. And buried within that letter's final line was a warning few could ignore. It was never about the women. It was about the lie that protected a killer. For decades, historians believed Jack the Ripper's story ended in mystery, an unsolved puzzle lost to time. But new revelations suggest it was never meant to be solved at all. Behind the shadow of the killings lay a lie, one so carefully crafted that it protected not only the murderer, but an entire system that needed him to remain hidden.
But whether it was the same left kidney removed from the body of Eddowes could not be determined. It could, for instance, have been an elaborate hoax by a medical student or someone with access to human organs.
The truth began to emerge when researchers cross-referenced the surviving Scotland Yard records with asylum admissions from the late 1880s. Among the entries was a name that appeared repeatedly: Nathan Kamiński, a Polish immigrant who lived in the same Whitechapel neighborhood as Aaron Kosminski. Early police notes had confused the two men, often using their surnames interchangeably. Nathan was a hairdresser too, but unlike Aaron, he disappeared without a trace shortly after the final Ripper murder. Some investigators now believe that Nathan, not Aaron, was the real killer, and that the police quietly substituted Aaron's name to close the case without admitting failure. Aaron, who was already mentally unstable, made the perfect scapegoat. He was institutionalized, unable to defend himself, and conveniently shared a nearly identical background. the authorities could assure the public that the danger was over.
In saying that he was a Polish Jew, I am merely stating a definitely ascertained fact.
While hiding the fact that the real killer may have died or escaped London entirely, the deception went further. Confidential letters between Inspector Swanson and Assistant Commissioner Anderson hinted that they knew the truth. One note read, "Our man is beyond reach, but London will rest easier believing he is caged." It was a statement of quiet resignation and deliberate misdirection. In protecting their reputations, the police preserved a myth that outlived them all. The story of Jack the Ripper wasn't just about murder. It was about a cover-up woven into the very institutions sworn to protect the truth. And as historians revisited the documents, one question began to haunt every new discovery. If they were willing to lie about this, what else has history hidden from us? The final revelation that changes everything. When the last fragments of the Ripper investigation were digitized for public access, few expected to uncover anything truly new. Yet hidden among the scanned police files was a long-forgotten report dated February 1892, a memo marked Classified Internal Review. It had been buried under decades of paperwork, but its contents shattered every accepted version of the story. The memo revealed that Scotland Yard had quietly reopened the Ripper case months after Aaron Kosminski's confinement. The reason? Another killing. Brutal, identical in method, and committed hundreds of miles away in Manchester. The victim's body bore the same surgical incisions that defined the Whitechapel murders. The implication was undeniable. Either a copycat had emerged, or the real Jack the Ripper had never been caught. Even more disturbing was the document's closing note. Subject identified through medical correspondence with London physician Dr. W. Gull, deceased. Recommendation: terminate investigation to avoid public alarm. This cryptic statement reignited theories that Sir William Gull, the royal physician rumored to have connections to the Ripper case, may have facilitated the original cover-up or known more than he ever admitted. Modern forensic historians, reviewing these revelations, concluded that the killings might have involved more than one perpetrator, possibly operating under shared motives or protection. The precision of the mutilations, the political interference, the silence from the crown, it all pointed toward a conspiracy of power rather than a lone madman. The Ripper had become both a man and a myth, a creation of fear that served those who thrived in its shadow. The greatest irony was that the truth had always been within reach, buried not by time, but by design. Every new discovery, every DNA test, every forensic revelation had drawn the circle closer, not to a single killer, but to a system that weaponized mystery itself. And so, as the final files were unsealed, historians were forced to confront an unsettling truth. Perhaps Jack the Ripper was never meant to be caught, because his real identity threatened far more than justice ever could. Outro. The legend of Jack the Ripper endures not because of who he was, but because of what he revealed. A society willing to trade truth for silence. Every new clue uncovers another layer of deceit, reminding us that some mysteries persist not through ignorance, but by deliberate design. What else still lies hidden?